Hello again. How's the morning for everybody? You know, part of our special pleasure here at Bioneers is bringing a lot of superstars that, the greatest people that nobody's ever heard of, right? And not nobody, I mean, they're known in certain worlds, but not nearly so much as they ought to be, in our opinion. And so we really appreciate your confidence in coming to hear a lot of people that you don't necessarily know who they are, because they're not famous. So thank you very much for, allowing Bioneers to do that. And one of those stars in the Pantheon is our next speaker. So shortly after my wife Nora and I first landed in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1974, we moved to a small farm 25 miles north of Santa Fe. Chimayo is home to the Santuario de Chimayo, called the Lourdes of North America for its reputedly miraculous healing dirt. It's one of the famous traditional Spanish northern villages that remained after the conquistadores retreated south around 1600. The villages stayed largely isolated for centuries in this beautiful, though very harsh, high mountain country. Farming has been central to their survival and their culture ever since. Nora and I wanted to be on the land, to heal ourselves and to farm. We wanted to learn basic real-world life ways, from growing food to solar building, canning our vegetables, and chopping firewood. In this high desert mountain ecology, water is life. Our little farm's water rights were administered by a community-based system of acequias, or irrigation ditches, that were diverted from the Santa Cruz River originating in the Rocky Mountains just above us. The acequia system was originally hand-dug centuries ago by the original Spanish settlers. They brought the practice from Spain, where it migrated from the Islamic desert cultures in North Africa. Governing water was the basis of Sharia, Islamic law. The word Sharia actually means path to the water source. The village respected water as a commons, requiring very strict governance. Our first visitor was the mayordomo of the acequia, Juan Trujillo. Juan was a saturnine figure carrying a battered shovel over his shoulder, and he made very sure that we understood our obligations to use only as much as he permitted, exactly when he permitted. He warned us that guns had been drawn over such matters, seriously. And as I learned, I was expected to show up early on Saturday morning for the annual community ditch cleaning day. I never worked so hard in my life. About 60 men and boys armed with shovels and an occasional bottle of Jack Daniels left me in the dust, or more accurately, in the mud. Only sheer willpower kept me heaving spoon after spoon of impossibly heavy mud, with willows whipping my sunburned face. But I had to prove myself. As a newcomer and a city boy, I was also one of only 6 Anglo families in a valley of about 5,000 Hispanics, with centuries-old roots in this tierra sagrada, sacred earth, sacred land. Nora and I really did farm, and the community came to accept us. Because most young people were leaving the land, anyone who farmed seriously gained the community's respect. Our beloved Spanish next-door neighbors relished floating our baby daughter, Ramona, down the acequia in an inner tube to her squealing delight. I was elected treasurer of the ditch committee, which I took as a great honor, until I discovered it also meant that Juan would be calling me up at 5 a.m. on Sunday mornings to go fix the ditch. But truly it was an honor. I became a member of a community built around the commons of water and food. For us, the healing dirt of Chimayo truly was tierra sagrada. Arturo Sandoval has lived tierra sagrada. He's an elder and an esteemed leader in the Indo-Hispano lineage of northern New Mexico. Arturo's life work is as a bridge builder, an organizer, and a teacher. He works among the often conflicted indigenous, Latino, and Anglo cultures of the Southwest, helping to revitalize local and regional cultures, protect ecosystems, and boost economic development in one of the nation's poorest regions. He deeply understands that these diverse cultures have critically important and endangered traditional knowledge to teach the dominant culture, from a living commons to a profound love of community and the land. Arturo's founder and president of the nonprofit Center for Southwest Culture, which helps develop healthy Indigenous and Latino communities through economic development initiatives and educational and cultural work in the southwestern U.S. and in Mexico. He's advised community-based organizations, large companies, and government bodies at the local, national, and international levels. With 40 years' experience in media and public relations, he's worked as an award-winning print journalist, TV news anchor, and news photographer. He's also founder and president of Voces, Inc., a communications and organizational development consulting firm based in Albuquerque and Chihuahua, Mexico. Bioneers is very honored to be working with Arturo right now on our Dreaming New Mexico food shed localization project, which he'll be talking about and we'll be talking about this afternoon. And his work has been about conserving Hispanic and indigenous foodways in the Southwest. Arturo was also a key organizer of the first Earth Day. He served as the Western Regional Coordinator for what remains the largest civil action in American history, 20 million people who turned out for the Earth. He was also a Vietnam War resistor. He refused induction into the U.S. Army and was subsequently tried and convicted for his refusal to serve in an unjust war. Please join me in welcoming Arturo Sandoval, one of the great visionary leaders from Nuevo Mexico.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Kenny. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I grew up in the Española Valley, which lies along the Rio Grande in northern New Mexico. My village is surrounded on three sides by Pueblo lands. Both Santa Clara Pueblo and Oque Owingue Pueblo have existed for centuries. Santa Clara was established more recently, only in 1550, and Oque Owingue was founded in 1200 AD. Spaniards first settled in the valley in 1598, and we know that people have been living in the Rio Grande Basin for the past 10,000 years. As a result of having people on our land for so long, history is very much alive there and plays a deep role in our lives. Whenever I wasn't running through the open Piñon Hills on Santa Clara Pueblo land, I would explore the bosque along the Rio Grande. There, I knew I was sitting alongside a river that had already seen countless generations of people live and die along its banks. What the Rio Grande did for me was to show that people in our region had a historical tie to a north-south flow of peoples and history. Starting in the Rocky Mountains of southern Colorado, the Rio Grande cuts right through the heart of New Mexico as it meanders 450 miles from north to south and exits the state at El Paso del Norte. As I grew up and learned more, it became clear to me that there has existed in the southwestern United States a deep imprint of knowledge and commerce and human interaction that has tied us to the peoples and cultures of Mexico and Latin America since time immemorial along this north-south axis. Looking back, I now know that for thousands of years, first Americans took to the trails in the name of the harvest, the hunt, commerce, and celebration. They may have helped forge trails at least as far back as 8 or 9 millennia ago. They forged thousands of miles of trails from central Mexico to Oque Owingue in the Española Valley, my homelands. All of these trails were along a north-south axis, and all of these trails linked Central America, Mexico, and North America together. At least 3 well-documented major north-to-south arteries or connected segments of trails began in the Central Valley of Mexico and ended in what we now know as the southwestern United States. One 1,500-mile trail began in Mexico City and ran generally northward for more than 1,000 miles across Mexico's central highlands and through the Chihuahuan Desert Basin to the Rio Grande's Paso del Norte crossing. It then followed the Rio Grande upstream for about 400 miles to the upper drainage basin. Finally, with the emergence of settled villages of first Americans, traders likely became the primary authors of the trails of the Southwest. In his book, Traders of the Western Morning, John Updike Terrell itemized nearly 250 trade items which fueled the commerce of the first American trails and markets of the Southwest. After Spanish conquest of the Americas, the Spaniards used existing first American trails as the basis for what we call the Caminos Reales, the royal roads that emanated from Mexico City throughout Mexico and what is now the southwestern United States. The 1,500-mile road that connected New Mexico to Mexico City was called El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, also known as the Silver Road or Road to Santa Fe. Including its branches, the Camino Real extends for nearly 2,000 miles, and in the late Spanish colonial period and through the Mexican period, the northernmost part of the Camino Real between Santa Fe and Chihuahua became a significant commercial route, especially since the Camino Real connected in Santa Fe with the Santa Fe Trail from Missouri. In New Mexico, we are the inheritors of what these first Americans and Spanish colonial trails brought with them. One of the defining aspects for me of pre-Columbian societies was their communal nature. Work, religion, social order, and all other functions of these societies were organized around the concept of the circle or the commons. This indigenous American idea of the individual identified primarily through his or her role as a part of a larger community clashed with the Euro-American notion of individual striving and achievement. Similarly, European settlement of most of the Americas was done by Spain. Spaniards introduced land grants and acequia systems, irrigation, to the Americas. Unlike Northern European ideas of individualism, Spain introduced communal models of development and colonization. Used as a means of colonizing the Americas, land grants and acequias were forms of governance that fostered communal living among the Spaniards, mestizos, and their first American allies. I grew up in this communal environment. Our neighbors in Española were the Santa Clara and Oque Owinga tribes. There, everything they did was tied to the commons and the greater identity of the clans and the tribe. In Española and throughout northern New Mexico, we had extensive acequia and land grant systems. Both of these systems are still in place today, though greatly diminished from their Spanish colonial and Mexican heydays. With the advent of U.S. conquest and colonization, an ongoing battle began over how to define and measure success. That definition increasingly became defined by how much wealth an individual achieved. The prevailing story of American life became the solitary struggle of an individual working against all odds to succeed. The cowboy became an American icon precisely because he personified America's core value of individualism. The image of the cowboy riding alone across the prairie, gun holstered to his side, ready and willing to get what he needed or wanted at the point of a gun, resonated and still resonates deeply with Americans. Individualism clashed completely with the communal models practiced in both First America and Latino America. This fundamental clash of values continues to this day, causing friction and misunderstanding not only in this country but across the hemisphere. As we face increasingly critical issues about how to live sustainably in the 21st century, I believe we have reached a point where these conflicting core values, individualism versus communalism, need to be deeply re-examined. If we are to succeed in restoring our places, in helping the planet to survive, I believe we need to make a deep recommitment to communal living. Those communal models, thank you. Those communal models still exist across Mexico and Latin America. They exist in First America, and they exist in New Mexico. However, these models have been weakened over the centuries by colonization and oppression. And as people of color living in these traditional communities, we also have been weakened. Faced with the loss of our land and the erosion of our culture, we find ourselves today in a very difficult situation. I worry that as a community, we are not as emotionally or psychologically resilient as we should be. We suffer from alcoholism, depression, domestic violence, drug abuse, and a host of other life indicators at a much higher rate than do whites. This is largely due to the undiagnosed effects of trauma on our communities. But regardless of the cause, it remains our responsibility to fight against these insidious destroyers of our peoples. And ultimately, we have to assume full responsibility for our own well-being and for the well-being of our own communities. There is a common dicho or saying in Spanish that says, luz en la calle, oscuro en la casa. Literally translated, it means light in the street, darkness at home. That dicho means that people often espouse a set of values in public, but fail to live out those same values in their personal lives. How many times have we seen leaders of our communities offer themselves up to serve, only to stumble as they fail to make their personal values match their public rhetoric? The same applies to our own communities. Too many of our leaders, either appointed, elected, or chosen by the people, fail to maintain the trust placed in them to achieve our common goals. I have changed the traditional dicho I quoted above to say, primero luz en la casa y luego luz en la calle. Translated literally, it means, first let there be light at home, and then there can be light in the street. Simply put, we as leaders must spend time making ourselves better people while we simultaneously strive to make our communities better places. Our communities must work hard on two major fronts. First, we must fight against the forces that continue to destroy our communities and our places and our cultures, as we always have. There are real threats out there. But we must also struggle to ensure that we as individuals are the models of health and love and concern we hope and expect our communities to become. We have to set and expect better behavior and better discipline and better work habits from each other and from our own children and our own grandchildren. We have to set these higher expectations for each other without tearing our commons, our plazas, our circles apart. One activity in which we must engage, fighting off forces that are destroying our communities, is external. It's dealing with challenges to sustainable living and healthy communities presented to us by outside forces and circumstances. But the other activity in which we must struggle, serving as models of the communities we want to see, is an internal journey. In all we do, we must constantly remain on these two paths. One, the path of service to our community. The second, the journey to keep our souls and spirits alive and healthy. In New Mexico, we have launched an effort to keep our Mexican land-based communities in place, on place, and in a good place. Through the Cooperative Development Center of New Mexico, called CODECE, it is a three-pronged effort to take an agricultural Latino land-based culture from the 18th century into the 21st century, as intact as possible, but even more viable than before. CODECE is working in three major areas. These include organic farming, cultural tourism, and affordable housing. In northern New Mexico, we still have many Mexicano farmers and ranchers with water rights and significant areas of arable land. These water rights and the land base that goes with them have been in the hands of Mexicanos in Spanish colonial times, most since 1692, or right after the end of the Pueblo Revolt. Most of these arable lands are small private farms and ranches. Over the centuries, these lands became more and more fragmented as ancestors divided land among increasing numbers of heirs. On these smaller plots of land, Mexicano farmers and ranchers plant mostly alfalfa or hay to feed small herds of cattle they maintain to sell to local sales yards. This use of their water and land resources provides too small of an income to sustain a modern family. So most of these Mexicano farmers have to seek salary jobs outside their communities. While they continue this traditional lifestyle, economic pressure is building to take away their water rights. Desert cities, high-tech companies, and other business interests desperately need the water that now belongs to these small-scale ranchers and farmers. As a result, the water is selling at a premium, and many Mexicano farmers are lured by the prospect of big dollars for sale of their water rights. CODECE is recruiting Mexicano farmers to convert their use of arable land from alfalfa and hay to organic farming. Working closely with Don Bustos of Santa Cruz Farms, CODECE hopes to spread the gospel among Mexicano farmers of intensive organic farming as a way to create higher farm income and a good quality of life. At Santa Cruz Farms, Don has demonstrated it is possible to grow high income per acre growing organic vegetables and fruits. On 3.5 acres that he owns and farms intensely, he generates more than $120,000 a year. In the area of cultural tourism, CODECE has initiated several pilot projects to show that done correctly, cultural tourism can benefit land-based communities of color while keeping them intact. Beginning 2 years ago, CODECE began recruiting city folk to join parciantes, traditional Mexicano acequia irrigators, in repairing and cleaning the acequia madre. The main irrigation canal is a communal responsibility, and maintaining it falls on the shoulders of all the parciantes. In response to our successful efforts in bringing 15 volunteers who paid money to work on the canal, one local acequia was able to increase their participation from 5 parciantes to 18 in the first year and to 25 parciantes in year 2. In affordable housing, we have helped develop cooperative models, which we believe will still make housing affordable for working families after the economic meltdown of 2008. In a classic Back to the Future scenario, we are encouraging Mexicanos in rural communities to build compact housing around small plazas. In this way, we hope to use the built environment to create the positive communal social behaviors we seek. This is not easy work, as I know you all understand. Understandably, rural folk are leery of change and uncomfortable trying new approaches. Getting people to work together on any level is probably the hardest part of building community. There are no shortcuts, and progress often seems to move at a snail's pace. Building communities is still done with a pick and a shovel. Still, unless we can all begin to rethink how we can better use our existing land and water resources in northern New Mexico, I believe we will likely disappear as a people and as a culture. We must reinvent our communities using existing resources. We have the land and water base still in our possession to transform ourselves into vibrant microagricultural centers that answer much of the food security question and that ultimately position us to survive and succeed in the postmodern world. My sense is that this scenario is playing itself out all across the US and Latin America. Finally, we must have a sense of play in everything we do. Yes, we want to help save the world, but let's make sure we're only trying to save that small slice that we can handle. There is much to laugh about in our work. For example, we always claim that Nuevo Mexicanos and First Americans in New Mexico have very different concepts of time than generally held in the US. In our modern society, we believe that time is linear. We believe we can save time and become more efficient. How many courses out there offer to teach us how to actually manage time? But meanwhile, in First America and Latino America, and certainly in our communities in Nuevo Mexico, time is seen as interconnecting circles, much like tossing a stone into a lake and seeing the ripples interconnect with other stones being thrown into the lake. To illustrate that point, in 1982, I attended Feast Day at one of New Mexico's 19 pueblos. I had a great time watching the dancing and breaking bread at the home of a good friend of mine. At the end of the day, my friend said, "We'll come back again anytime." And that was certainly my intention, but it wasn't until August of this year, 27 years later, that I was able to return for feast day at that particular pueblo. I was very worried on my drive up there about what I was going to tell my friend about my long absence. I had come up with a long line of excuses about I was raising kids, I was saving the world, I was getting old and my hair was going gray. So I was very anxious when I got to his house 27 years later and knocked on the door. So he opened the door, and the first thing he said to me when he saw me was, "Arturo, back so soon?" Thank you.
Go back out there. They want to report.
Thank you. Thank you.